Hello everyone, it's Cam from Whimsy Way Art, and I've decided to show you my newest set of pencils. It is the Caran Luminance 76 in the box. So because a friend of mine has asked me how I use these pencils, I've decided to do this video. These are just extremely excellent pencils. They perform like no other pencil. I'm a very big fan of Holbein's, and they are very, very, very good. These I call them just a smidgen better, and mostly it's because I think they behave a little bit like pastels, chalk pastels. So you kind of have the best of both worlds with these. You can blend them more evenly like a chalk pastel, but you still get a lot of control with points. So, so these are the pencils that I've chosen for this particular endeavor. So my friend Paige also asked me not only to demonstrate how I would use the Caran and what you can do with them. She also asked me to do a video on faces, on skin tones. And I, of course, have chosen Serene by Nick Filbert, or dare I pronounce it, Nicholas F. Chandrawianetta. He is hands down my favorite artist drawing coloring books today, and I really wish he would do more. This is my first copy of Serene, and don't hate me, but I did take pages out of it because it's much bigger than most books. When I first got it, I was recuperating from surgery, and I had a very limited space to work in, so I went ahead and took the page out. Now, I do have another copy that is pristine, so no one needs to, let me have it for taking my book apart. And I know some people like to take books apart. I'm not one of those. I'm a bibliophile, and to me, you don't deface a book no matter what, but it was just necessary in this case. Now, I've only done one picture out of Serene, and it's been a while, and it was this one. This is, what is her name? Goddess of the Sea. And for this one, I used mostly Caran Pablos. The background has some Derwent drawing in there because they just blend so nicely, and their greens are so natural looking. So I'm going to use this because there's lots of bare skin in this. Ha ha ha, bare skin. Anyway, I'm going to use this as an example for just a quick discussion on what we're trying to do when we're doing a realistic skin. Now, I don't mean realistic in color, obviously, but realistic in highlight and shadow, and the nature of skin. Excuse me, get a sip of coffee. So let me find a pointer, something to point with. Well, okay, let's use a pencil. Okay, so this is a sea goddess. I chose to do her a sort of a blue tone, as if she doesn't really get out of the water very often. And since the first thing you want to do when you color anything is decide where your light source is. Because you need to know where to put the shadows and where to put the highlights. It's the difference between making metal shiny or giving depth to rocks, a pile of rocks even, just as basic as that. This one is pretty easy. It gives you the sun already. So here's the sun. So we knew that wherever light we had came from here. So yes, the sun right here, the highlights in this picture are in green. You can see the tops of her breasts are green. The tops of her knees are green here. And it's where the light would shine most brightly on what parts of her body. When you're doing faces, you have things to consider like hair. You always have to say, okay, so the sun is here, and the part I want to color is here. But is there something in the middle that is obstructing the light from hitting that surface? So we have a shadow here, and if she didn't have hair obstructing that part of her forehead, then it would also have been bright and brightly lit. Of course, down here, it's in deep shadow, and under her arm, it's in deep shadow because the sun is behind her, and this area is obviously blocked. The light is blocked from getting to it, and the light is blocked here by the edge of her jaw. Before we get started for real, I want to add that in the process of editing this video, I discovered that the colors just aren't showing up properly on the screen, and the skin tones look really yellow. Rather than choosing another page and starting all over, I'm going to edit in a photo of the work as it appears at the end of this video. I've changed the lights over my desk, my camera settings, and changed my editing software, so hopefully the next video in this series will be much closer to the actual colors. Please be patient with me while I get the technical trial and error worked out so we can get on to the fun stuff. And we're going to look at the page that I pulled out for this video. And this is Ayala. And Ayala, it's just beautiful. What can I say? There's nothing that is not beautiful about this. So in addition to having a nice large surface area of face and skin, there's hints and clues as to where the shadows are. It's not really grayscale per se. It's kind of a crosshatch shading, but it'll give you an idea of where the shadows are supposed to be. And because this is so dark in the shadow, we know it's a rather dramatic light source. It's a very bright light. So the places that are exposed will be very bright, and the places that are in shadow will be very dark. The other reason I chose this is because there's lots of textiles in this. And textiles, clothing and cloth, when it's folded, gives you a lot of opportunity to practice a highlight and shadow. And it's very easy to make things look three-dimensional. If you remember that you are not drawing or coloring an item, you are coloring the light and you are coloring the shadow. And that's what makes things three-dimensional. That's what makes things look real. Any object you look at, a tree, you squint your eyes and you pick out which part of the tree is the brightest. You can't really see what you're looking at, but you can see a basic shape of the light and the shape of the shadow. You would draw the light and you would draw the shadow. And the shape, if you're drawing the shapes of the light and the shadow, the shape of the object follows. But this has lots of opportunity for us to practice highlight and shadow. I love these books because you're not constrained by color. You can pretty much make anything, whatever color you want, and it still will look fantastic. There's just a level of beauty and perfection and love in these drawings that don't exist in almost any other coloring book or any other art book. So Nick just blows me away. So what I'm going to start by doing is I'm going to go through the Luminance, and I'm going to pick out basic skin tone colors out of the Luminance pencils. It's just for this exercise, I am going to keep it with a basic Caucasian skin tone. The thing about skin is just like with the goddess of the sea here, it doesn't really matter what colors you are using. What matters is the light and dark of the colors. In this one in particular, you know, it's gray, blue, and gray and green, and very pale, like a blue tinted white. And then, you know, there's some lavender or some purple, violet in the low tones. So, you know, but it still looks like skin. So it doesn't really matter what colors that you choose out of the box, as long as you have an array of colors from light to dark. Okay, so I've pulled out some supplies. Obviously, I've got the page here. I've got a sheet of just cheap loose leaf drawing paper for swatching and for testing. I've got a sheet I had lying around of tracing paper or vellum, because you don't want, I like to place this over parts of the drawing that I'm working on so I can see where I'm at, but I won't smudge the drawing. Some pencils smudge more than others. I haven't really used the Luminance enough to make a call on that, but I know that polychromos smudge pretty bad, so it's always good to have something like this lying around. And I also have this Strathmore colored pencil pad. I thought that we will swatch out the colors that we're using, so we don't have to keep referring back to a full color chart every time. I try to do one of these for every page, every large page at least, to keep track of the colors and what I've used them on. So I've got a Tombow Bono Zero mechanical eraser, and I love these things. These are an epiphany. They have a very small point, so you can get really right in there and erase in fine detail and kind of even draw with the eraser. And they're as good as the Tombow Mono erasers anywhere. I've got a Tombow Mono sand and rubber eraser. So this one is more abrasive, it's more sandy, and this end is rubber, and these are probably erase better than any other eraser that I have. I've also got a brand new kneaded eraser. These are so therapeutic. These are made of rubber, and the good thing about these is that you can twist them and get them into a shape, and when you erase, it's less of a hard line. You get a hard corner on a regular square eraser, and you can get a hard line when you erase. This one you can just take, you know, just a smidgen off. It's more of an organic shape, and these are really great for creating highlights. So if you've put down just a little bit too much color and you need to take it back off again and amp the highlights up a little bit, these are really good for that. They get a little dirty, you just knead it some, and they sort of self-clean themselves up to a point. Oops. And so these are really nice. Over time they do get harder and dry out, so you do have to replace them periodically. But this is a brand new one. Just took it out of plastic. Okay, I've got a Caran d'Ache full bright blender. Obviously these can be very brittle, and if you hold them too hard they will just break right in your hand. So I have a broken one here that I put in a pencil extender, because they're just, you know, that's just the nature of the beast, and it's worth the trouble. And I've also got, let's see, a brand new Tagall pencil sharpener. My dad bought this for me in my birthday loot last year, and I've been saving it. My old one's getting a little bit worn out, so we'll just pull out a brand new one. And you know me, aqua, anything aqua or anything blue, I can't help but have it. So yes, give me all the aqua things. I need them all. All the turquoise, all the aqua, all the teal. Anything that they make, I will take one. Or two. Okay, so let's set these aside for a minute. And what I want to do first is find the light source. So the light source, for purposes of doing her face, sort of directional wise, I have here a little post-it flag. You can use a piece of tape, you can use a pencil dot, you can use whatever you want. So you kind of just pick out where you think the sun is coming from. So we've got, obviously, you know, the darker shadows are down here. You can tell that from her face. If they didn't give you hints as to where the shadows were, then you could just pick a place and go from there. But we just want to figure out where the shadows would be. So that's pretty good, but we've also got a really light highlight on the top of her nose and a shadow under the ridge of her brow. So I think it's more up this direction. So I'm going to take this post-it here and I'm going to put it there to remind me that that's where the sun is. That's where the light source is. Now, if you really want to get adventurous, you can stick more than one light source in. That's kind of difficult, but it'd be good for a challenge. So we'll just write sun on there. So we know that's the sun. And we have to get used to looking at that as the sun, to thinking of that as the sun. And then after a while, if you do it often enough, you'll automatically know that that's where the light's coming from, and you won't even have to think about it. So the colors I picked out for the flesh tones in this particular drawing, okay, I'm going to start with the highlights, and the very highest highlight, the very lightest color here, it's almost white, it's buff titanium. So we're going to put a swatch of the buff titanium down. And, oh, I love these pencils. Okay, so it is number 801. Find my pen again. So we'll write 801 buff titanium. I guess I should print, shouldn't I? And the second color I picked out is, let's see, this is number 872, burnt ochre 10%. A lot of times I'll pick out my favorite skin tones, and once I've made this swatch or this little chart, I'll keep it inside the pencils or with the color chart, so I don't have to go hunting up the colors very often. Okay, so and then I've got a third color, and this is burnt ochre 50%. And a lot of other sets, this one's got a little bit of a piece of pigment in it I need to sharpen out. That happens sometimes, even with the best pencils. So in a lot of sets I like to use the cinnamon for this color, but there is no cinnamon particularly in this set, so I will use burnt ochre 50%. 876. And a word on this specifically, you'd be tempted to use burnt ochre 10%, burnt ochre 50%, and burnt ochre for all of your colors. And you can do that. But in reality, your entire face would not be a tint of burnt ochre. To make things more realistic, you kind of need to change them up once in a while. Now, I would have done that here, but there isn't another color that I think would work best. other than burnt ochre 50%. So we've got 3 basic skin tones to work with. Sometimes I choose a brown, like a sepia, but this time I'm going to do something that will add even more dimensionality. And that is going to sound pretty crazy to everybody, but what you're going to do is you're going to pick the complementary color, and that's going to be your darkest shadows. Okay, so these are obviously a tint or tints of burnt ochre, which in this case is orange. Now you just look at it and you can know it's more orange than it is any other color. It's more orange than it is red violet. It's more orange than it is orange than it is yellow. It's more orange than it is a reddish tone. So the complement for orange is blue. And for the very darkest shadows, I'm going to use Prussian blue. And what this does is it gives a little more interest, of variation to the picture. Some people will want to use black. Black is okay. Brown is okay. But the more colors that you can use, the more three-dimensional something's going to seem. This is tricky. When you mix blue and orange together, you automatically get what we call a gray in art speak, but it's really usually a pretty nasty muddy brown. And I'll show you here if we mix the blue, the darkest orange, and the blue together, and we'll see what color we expect to get from that. This one might even go green, depends. It's just hard to say. Yeah, we're going a little bit green here. So, but in technical terms, this is actually would be considered a gray. And what you're doing by mixing complements is graying out the color. That's just, you know, art terminology. That's school terminology. You don't really need to know that. So, yeah. So that's a pretty ugly color. It's not the color we really want. So we need to bridge these two colors. So let's go ahead and write the 159 Prussian. Sorry, I just went back to cursive again. And we're going to dig in the box and find a really dark brown to act as a buffer between the blue and the burnt ochre. Alright, so I've pulled out to act as a buffer this French gray. Now I almost chose the sepia, but I think this will be even better. So this will give us an idea of what the colors are when we go to grab for them. I went ahead and mixed the French gray and the Prussian blue together a bit, and you get an idea of the transition we've got between these. And it's much less green. If anything, it's a little bit more turquoise in color. So the other thing I did was I picked out some colors for lips and sort of blush. We have burnt sienna 10%, which is a lot more of a mauve color. And I really like this color. It's a very soft pink. And deep at the same time. It's got lots of character. And then I've got purplish red for the darker shadows there. So for lips, things like that, we're going to use the purplish red. And then we'll go ahead and we'll put the French gray in this mix too, because even lips have shadows. I'm leaving off eye makeup for now because I I have a tendency to not use makeup on my faces. In this case, since we're going to use the Prussian blue and the French gray for the shadows, it's going to look like she has blue eye makeup on anyway. Or it'll give the hint of it, perhaps. Let's see, Burnt Sienna 10. Okay, what was that one? 862. And then 350, purplish red, and French gray I think is 808. My pencil, the writing isn't real crisp on it, so I can't tell, but I think it's 808. Let's see, let's get a little bit of a blend here so we can see what it is we're working with. It's always good to have a plan. A plan. So we get some overlap in there. Overlap this and see, oh, the beautiful blending, how beautifully that comes out. We'll get a little more the purplish red down, and then we'll blend over that again with the French gray. So we get sort of an idea what our blends are going to look like. And if you want an even better idea, get out the blender. You can go in circles, you can go in lines. I try to go in circles as much as possible. Just easier that way for me. So then you get an idea of what you'll have for lips. And to me, when you're talking about pink cheeks, they should echo the colors of the lips. So now we have a plan. We have a little bit of a guideline. We know what our colors are supposed to look like for this flesh tones, and we can get started. So now that we have our colors all picked out for the skin tones, what I want to do is I want to focus on the idea of the shadows and the color of the shadows. And what I've done is I've gone through on the textiles and I've used this French gray and just lightly shaded in the shadows, which is any part that the artist has shaded to tell us that there are shadows. And I've done this with the French gray because it brings continuity to the whole picture. Just because you've decided that, for example, this area is going to be really bright blue, which is what I'm leaning towards right now, it doesn't mean that the shadows also have to be dark blue. As a matter of fact, the more variety that you can make in the progression of your colors, the more realistic things are. A thing that is blue in real life, academically, in your brain, you think the shadows are going to just be dark blue, and that's not always the case. Sometimes the shadows are brown, sometimes they're red even. And a good way to think about this is to look at car paint, especially bright red car paint. Most bright red cars, your brain processes them as red, but the highlights are orange and the lowlights are purple. And those colors together trick your brain into thinking it is very bright red, but in reality, if you objectively look at just the colors of the shadows, they're often a different color. I almost never use black for shadows because shadows are almost never black. Almost nothing in nature is true black if you think about it. And when you use a brown, it brings a warmth to the picture. The other reason I'm using brown for all of the shadows is for continuity's sake. And often, and this happens with professional artists as well, you forget that each element of this page goes to make up a whole. And what you want is the whole to look like it's all done together, that it belongs together. Sometimes you get so fixated in thinking about this one little piece, these little beads right here, or her lips, or this what looks to be a tattoo of some sort on her back. You get fixated on thinking about each individual element, and you forget that the elements are all part of a whole. And if you start out by using one single color, and a shadow is a good place to do it, and also the brightest highlight is a good way to do it. If you start out with one single color and you use that color all over the page, then it won't look like a bunch of objects thrown together, but like a whole. So I started out, I just did the textiles. I went through and just lightly shaded any place that looks like a shadow, or what we would call a low light. And now we're going to find the places on her face, and we've been giving clues by the artist that are actually in shadow. And I'm using kind of a dull pencil here because I don't want a whole lot of pigment just now. We're going very light, and we're going to do this whole thing very lightly. We can always add more color, but it's very hard to take it off. And that is the key, I think, to doing faces, is to not get impatient. You just keep adding layer after layer after layer of color and adjusting ever so slightly every time. It's also much easier to blend and get a good gradient of blending if you have gone as lightly as possible, because we don't yet know exactly where all of the highlights and lowlights and the colors are going to come together. We don't know yet. So we're going to take what we do know, which is the shadows that Nick has provided for us to give us a hint of the shape of the face. Now, our ultimate goal here, with pretty much anything that we want to render realistically, is to take something from a flat world, because a piece of paper is flat, it's two-dimensional. We want to take that thing from the flat world, flatland, and we want to bring it into the three-dimensional world. And so what we're trying to do is take something that's flat, in theory a straight line, and we want to make it round, or make it look rounded. And if you've ever done a tutorial on how to color a pearl, or how to color a bead, or anything, a sphere, anything that's rounded, you'll realize that you can do that. You can make something look perfectly round, and yet it still be just flat on the page. So our ultimate goal is to bring this into 3 dimensions. Now, another thing to remember is we're always looking for a full range of value. And that's just a fancy artist term for saying, if we have a gradient, say for example, this would be a gradient. It goes from the darkest or the most saturated color to a very light color, all the way to white. If we want something to go from the darkest of the color all the way to the lightest, we want that same representation in every picture. So in theory, unless you're going for a particular look, it's the same with photography, and especially black and white photography. What is white, it should be the thing that you want to come farthest to the front. What is the darkest are the things that you want to recede into the background. I'm just going to put in a very light, very, very light, very barely there shade across the brow and down the side of the nose. The more difference there is between the highlight and the low lights, the more drama it brings. Art is very psychological, and it uses a lot of tricks to fool you into thinking it's real. And its ultimate goal, I think, and that I've always thought, was to instill some kind of emotion. So we're going to use every trick we can. If we want people to feel hot and bothered and excitable, we will use the bright colors and the reds and the pinks. We want to give a mood of quiet and peace. We're going to use blues and greens. And it just depends on what it is that we see in a particular piece of art and what we want you to see in a piece of art. Now, if I'm going to follow my own rules about shading, everything in this page, all of this headdress, will have French gray shadow or some French gray in the shadow. But for now, I'm just going to do the pieces that we're concerned with. Because it is so very busy, and we need to be able to pick out the tiny little parts without actually knowing what this is. I mean, is this a feather? Is this a leaf? Is it like gold foil jewelry? We don't know yet what we're going to do. So we're just going to pick out the parts that we know for certain what they are right now. Okay, I think we've pretty much got our shadows laid in. And so that's the easy part. And what I'm going to do now is take that scary blue, and I'm going to find the darkest places in the shadows, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue. Not a whole lot of blue, just a little bit. So usually the darkest places are under the nose, and things that are shadowed by the nose. There's inside the nostril, under the edge there. Under the edge of the lip. A little space there, and under the neck, That's a big one because that is a really deep shadow. And you see I'm just laying in just the minimum, the very lightest, and then a little bit darker in the very darkest spots. Okay. See, we'll have some of that blue shadow up here under the hairline. Let's see. And around this headdress, adding in some just a smidgen, just smidgens. Smidgens. I've always thought that was an extremely good word. Smidgens. Okay, in the crease of the eye, we've got quite a bit of shadow. And in the center here of the existing shadow, it would probably be the darkest. Let's get a little bit more on here. A little bit up by this hairline. Just barely. Just barely. Now, if you're just really at a loss as to where the shadows on a person's face are, you know, just go online, find a photograph, get in a magazine, find a photograph. You know, find something that's somewhat similar to the way someone's face is turned in the picture, and study it. You know, there's nothing saying that you can't use a piece of reference art to see where you should be putting highlights and shadows. Most artists do it. As a matter of fact, you know, we're mostly told and taught that if you want something to look realistic, then you actually sit in front of a real item and not a photograph. You get somebody to sit in front of you, maybe. Obviously, working from a photograph, sometimes it's all you can do. You know, practically. But, you know, other times, you know, you need to look at the real person. I gotta turn the page. I often turn my page. I'm sorry if that's irritating. It's just something I always do, and I can't seem to color properly or colorize properly or even draw properly without turning the whole page, which is another reason why I tore the page out of this book. And you see, I'm not in any hurry. It's part of the reason why it takes me so long to finish something, because you know, you go really slow and you just see what it needs next. Just a little bit at a time. Now I'm going to add some of the blue underneath this necklace. I guess you'd call it a necklace, because it's very shadowed down in this corner, and it would be under the necklace. But that's just barely a line. And I think that I'm going to come back in with the French gray again and add a little more to just, you know, have our buffer here between the blue shadow and the flesh tones, because we don't want that turning green, as we've discussed. So add a little bit more. Now, if you feel like you need more of a buffer zone, you can always extend the shadow a bit. So we can just add a little more sepia, or not sepia, French gray. I've got sepia on the brain because I often use sepia for this part. Sepia is a nice brown because it's usually got some bit of another color in it, so it gives you a hint of another color. Just add a little more shadow there and a little more shadow here. There will be, you know, all these little objects will cast shadows. Everything casts a shadow. Of course, if you go out on a summer's day and it's all bright outside and you look at your shadow, it's got very sharp edges because it's bright sun. If you go out on a less sunny day, a little bit of clouds, but still pretty bright, you can see that your shadow has softer edges. There's less contrast. I'm just going to make this all in shadow because I think this area of the headdress probably sticks out pretty far, so toward you. So I'm going to assume it's in shadow, this part of her face. Also, there needs to be a little more shadow here. Just from the way I see faces, there's always a little bit more shadow there. And I'm going to darken this some. Okay, so now that we've got some shadows in, now let's map out where we think the highlights should go. So I'm going to put those two pencils away. I've got this little glass jar thing, and I'm going to pick out the lightest color that I want in my skin tone, and that one is the burnt ochre 10%, and I'm going to find where the most light will be. And I know that the most light will hit the top of the brow. Hang on, did I just mess up? Oh, I did. Okay, actually buff titanium. So I'm going to find my little combo eraser. I'm going to take that off if I can. And just go lightly because we don't want to mess up the paper because that'll change how the color goes down. Just lightly, very lightly, very lightly. Okay, so let's try the kneaded eraser. We can be a little bit more aggressive with it, because mostly it's the pigment that sticks to the eraser, and not regular erasers sort of are, they're abrasive, so they're scratching off a layer of the paper along with it. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, buff titanium. So now we pick out, like I said, the brightest highlights. And we're going to map out where our brightest highlights are. And we're going to keep our edges pretty soft. So even though the center of an area will be pretty full of pigment, we want to keep our edges very soft and light because we're blending into other colors. So we pick out where the highest lights are. Now, generally what I do is, if you've got a side of the face that is definitely in deep shadow, you use a lot less of your highlight on that side, if any. I'm just going to add just a tiny bit on this side. Then we're going to go down, we know this very center, this little bit of the nose. And the good thing about these pencils is that you can go over the lights pretty well. You can go on top of the lighter colors if you want. Okay, and then we know the top of her cheekbone. That's a big one for a bright highlight. And it's also a big one for, you know, your color in your cheeks. But the plane of your face, you'll just go right above the cheekbone. And then probably right here on top of the lip, because that bows out. And you want that bright. You can almost see here is a direct line on the shadow, so let's look at that. And you can line your pencil up with that just perfectly. Or if I wanted to take, let's use a little ruler. This is an old one I've had for a long time, a triangle. We're going to line it up with this obvious line in the shadow right here, and we're actually going to move the sun a little bit. See how powerful we are. We're moving the sun backwards a little bit. I'm sorry if you can't see that, because I can't really see when I'm sitting down. So what I've started to do here is lay in our secondary color. This is the, what is it? Burnt ochre 10%. And where there's no buff titanium and where there's no Prussian blue, I put in this second tone, which means I'll cover what's still white down into the French gray, because we want to have a nice transition from the shadow to the light. And I'm also taking it just a smidgen over into the highlight, again just to blend it very lightly. We're going very lightly still. We can go a little bit darker into the French gray. And now we're getting some dimensionality here. We've got some roundedness. I'm going to lay the pencil on its side to get just a really light layer. Oh, it's really hard for me to just go right over this tattoo, but we'll come back to the tattoo later and fix it. Put some color into it. I'm thinking it's a henna tattoo. I don't think she needs anything brighter than a henna tattoo. in my head she's already very bright. All her colors are very bright. So yeah, we get down and we stay out of the Prussian blue and add this mid-tone. Now there isn't any Prussian blue down here around this very faint little bit of shadow that's made from the collar of her costume. So I'm going to get a little more aggressive down in here. Just fill the areas, because we can always go over it with the French gray and make it darker. Now, I'm doing the easy parts here. It's much easier to do her shoulders and neck than it is to do her face. So, you know, this takes a lot less thought. I mean, you know what a person's shoulders look like. You know that there's a line across the top of the shoulders, about like this. And some people have a little bit of a hump between the shoulders, and they're, you know, that's the natural curve of your spine. Some people have a lot more defined curve of the neck. Okay, and see, we've still stayed out of that blue because we haven't decided just how much of that blue we want to show yet. But we've got the other parts. See, there's no blue on this edge, so we're going to take this color right up to the edge. Okay, so we have highlight in here and mid-tone, and around the edges is the shadow. And I'm going to move up into her face now. The easiest place to start, I don't know, probably up here. We'll start around the hairline a little bit and work our way in to the highlight. Just a smidgen. And I'm using circular motions. Very lightly, just to keep from getting streaks. Sometimes you get streaks from going back and forth. You should get even coverage. And generally don't worry if you do get streaks, because if you have one of the blender pencils, that'll probably solve it. And we're just going to go against her top of her eyebrow with this, just to make a transition into the eyebrow. Just a smidgen of one. A smidgen, there's that word again. And very carefully I'm going around here, because I don't want, again, I don't want this color to blend into the blue or we're going to get green. I'm staying out of the blue. Oi, stay out of the blue. So I'm just going to tint the whole bottom lip with, yeah, this is Burnt Sienna 10%. This is the mauve, peachy, deep pink that I like so much. And we're going to give it a little bit of a line here just to remind us where it's supposed to be. And if you look at, look at the corner of your lip, the color kind of does eke out into your face, the rest of your skin from your lip in the corner. We also have a little bit of pink at the edge of your eyelid, probably the bottom edge, because underneath these lashes you won't be able to see it because her eyes are downcast. So we've got a little bit more color in here now. So with these colors, what we have is a more of a peachy person, peachy colored skin. I think we can actually get rid of a little bit of this highlight. It's just really wider than I think it would be. Add a little bit of a streak there to see if we can fix that later. And I think the tip of the chin would probably have some pink. In theory, you can add this color just about anywhere that you think needs a little pickup, where there might be a little more color, because it's so subtle. It's just really easy to just lay in a little bit more color and not get too crazy about it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work back in, and I'm going to pull out that French gray, and I'm going to just put in a little more French gray, blend over the edge of the mid-tone, and blend over into the blue with the French gray. I think I need to sharpen this maybe. That's odd. And I will say that I forgot when I started this video that the Luminance pencils are just a smidge too fat to fit in the Tegall sharpener easily. So I'm just using one of these little plain silver sharpeners with a German blade. The German blades are pretty darn good, so I think they just sharpen better. Okay, now if you think about how a person's chin is round, okay, this is the rounded edge, and then we come back over to this rounded edge. And this is where the chin starts to point out, right here. So I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow there, just to give it that round look. And I'm going over the blue French gray. And I'm just pulling the shadow just slightly out over into the next tone. And that sort of joins up. Here, there's like a plane, call it a plane. Here, a sort of a flat place. From the bottom of the lip, around the edge of the chin, into the jaw. And on some people, of course, that's more pronounced than on other people. But, you know, the more transitions, the more subtleties that you can add in, the more realistic it looks, for the most part. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go back around the face. I'm going to go over the Prussian blue. I'm going to feather out into the flesh tones. And you see, you're not really seeing that blue. And it's, you know, I understand that it's odd to think that there's something that you would put in that you don't really see. That you wouldn't notice. Wait. I'm going to go ahead and put this shadow in and blend over it really good and get it nice and dark, because in order to blend over into the light, you've got to have a good understanding of how dark that shadow is. And we don't want to go overboard with this right here, so I'm going to take off maybe just a smidge down the chin, because even though that's a dark place in shadow, we still need it to be lighter than the spot under the chin. And I forgot about this part, didn't I? Let's add some color in there. Okay, so we'll see how dark this edge is here around the face. That is a shadow from this headdress. So we're sort of going to add a little bit of more dark in here for that shadow. And we're going on the bottom edge of those objects, because from the top edge there will be more light. It might not be direct light, but there would be more light. And this is all very tiny, bunch of fiddly bits, so you might have to sharpen your pencil a couple of times. Luminance do not hold very, very, very sharp points for a long period of time. So that's okay. Because sometimes you don't want them to. And these aren't those pencils. If you want to have a sharp point all the time, then get the Pablos. Now, I love the Pablos. I love how they work and they behave, but their colors are just, I'm always constantly reaching, and they're a 120 set instead of 76. I'm constantly reaching for a pencil that doesn't exist when I'm working with them, because they have a limited color range and it's pretty much all bright or saturated colors. Now, supposedly you can use these with Pablos, but I haven't done it yet. You'd have to have a lot of room on your desk for all those pencils. So, I haven't tried it. Now, I do know that these pencils, these Luminance pencils, would work very well with Derwent drawing. And that makes me very happy, because I love Derwent drawing. These are very similar to Derwent drawing. Not quite as soft, but especially similar in spirit, I think. Let's see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm blending a little more aggressively. And I'm blending over the French gray, still staying out of the blue where the blue was. I'm blending over the French gray with this burnt ochre 10%, which is our medium skin tone, or middle skin tone. And I'm blending it, and I'm pulling the French gray into the medium skin tone a bit. The French gray gets lighter, of course. just need some more transition. In general, except for the highlight area, I will blend, once we start getting all the layers in, I will use the medium skin tone to blend the darker ones in general. And I'm going to do that here. I'm doing that here. I just got to stay out of the blue. Now, once you've done that, and I'm going to focus right here on this neck area. Wait, let's get the bottom of the jaw a little bit, because yeah, we need that out of the way. I'm going to focus on this small area of the neck, just because it's easy to see. So then I'm going to go back to the buff titanium, and I'm going to blend out from the buff titanium in to the mid, the burnt ochre tin, just on the edge, because we don't want to blend the burnt ochre tin over the buff titanium. That'll get rid of our highlight. But I'm going to blend over the edge of the burnt ochre 10%. Okay, now I'm going to get the burnt ochre 50%, and I'm going to put a little bit of color into the French gray. This will be our third skin color. Give it a little more tone. And you know, you just do light layers because you don't want to bully it. You want to let the pencils do the work. You want to find out how the best way that the pencils do their work and let them do it. And I think that's why a lot of people just love Prismacolor so much, because you can bully the hell out of those and you can force them to do your will. And then once you go and try another brand, another type, they're completely different. And you can't bully a lot of other pencils. And you have to learn how the pencils work best. Well, that looks pretty good. Pulling a little bit more, blending over again with the medium, the 10%, into the highlight. And in general, you'd want to do this all the way around. You should always keep your pencil moving around the area, so it stays even. Otherwise you'll end up with, you know, too much of the third skin tone in one spot and too little in another. Too much shadow, or you forget how you did the shadow. It doesn't quite match up, so you're supposed to just keep popping around. Another mistake I think a lot of people make is adding too much pink. Unless you're like me, you're not a pink person. There aren't really any pink persons people's, unless you're sunburned. And I noticed that when I try to do skin tones with the Rembrandt Lyra Polycolors, nice pencils, very nice pencils, but their skin tones are all very, very, very pink, and it's very hard to get something that is not pink. So unless you get the Polycolor Giants in the skin tones, which are great because they're not nearly as pink. Okay, so I've got an awful lot of highlight on the top of that lip, and it's starting to really, really stick out, and I don't want it to stick out quite that far, so I'm going to add some of the 10% ochre, and just let that very tip of her lip be highlighted. And then I'm going to come back again with the next color in the range and put a little bit of like a medium shadow in there. Because really people's, you know, that area of your face does not stick out very much. Okay, I'm going to put a little more in. We need some color in here. A little more color. Go right up into that blue. Just touching it. Just almost touching it. Not. Found out there was a blue, oh there it is, spot that I was going to go over with the French gray, and I forgot where I was going. Okay. Just looking it over, trying to decide where it might need some more shadow. Just add a little more in there. And this eyebrow is obviously a shadow. You can tint it. I mean, if she were a redhead, you think you could tint it any color you wanted. But I think I'm just going to leave them brown. Okay, let's see, we'll go back. Oh, there's another spot with the blue that I didn't blend over with the French gray yet. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep working this just a smidgen at a time. It's almost done. And when we get to part 2, then we're going to blend and get that nice seamless, realistic look. So thanks for watching, and I'll finish the second video as soon as I can.